In a busy city cafe, a well-dressed man in a tailored suit approaches the counter, confident and calm. He's used to having everything his way, until the card reader flashes declined. Embarrassed murmurs ripple around the line as he fumbles for cash. But before he can react further, a small voice interrupts. A poor little girl, clutching a few coins in her tiny hand, looks up at him and smiles in a way that will change everything. The city cafe was buzzing with the usual Saturday crowd, students hunched over laptops, friends laughing over steaming cups of coffee, and baristas calling out orders with practiced cheer. Among them, Mr. Harrison, impeccably dressed in a navy suit with polished shoes and a designer watch glinting on his wrist, approached the counter with a confident stride. He moved with the ease of someone who expected the world to bend to his will, accustomed to life in the rarefied air of wealth and privilege. Sliding his gold card across the reader for his latte and a croissant, Harrison barely looked at the screen. But when the card machine flashed declined, his confident demeanor faltered. A low murmur spread through the cafe. Harrison froze, trying to mask the sudden flush of embarrassment creeping up his neck. He quickly fumbled for another card, but the second attempt failed as well. Around him, eyes flickered in curiosity. Some patrons smirked, others whispered. Harrison felt his chest tighten. He was used to control, to seamless transactions, to a world where money removed friction. And yet, here he was, reduced to fumbling in public like anyone else. His pride stung more than the awkwardness of the moment. Behind him, a small line of customers waited patiently, or at least, they tried. Among them stood a little girl, no older than 7 or 8. She wore a faded jacket, patched at the elbows, and shoes that had clearly seen better days. Her hair, slightly tangled, framed a round, earnest face. Clutched in her small hands were a few worn coins, which she held tightly, counting them nervously. Harrison noticed her at the same moment she noticed him, though their worlds were miles apart. The girl's eyes were bright and observant, not intimidated by his wealth or appearance. There was a quiet courage in her stance, a boldness that came from necessity, not vanity. Her gaze lingered on the card machine, then shifted to him, curious yet kind, as if she understood something about embarrassment he had long forgotten. For a brief, surreal second, the cafe seemed to pause. The scent of freshly baked croissants, the hiss of steaming milk, even the chatter of patrons faded into the background. Harrison's heartbeat slowed as he realized that the world outside his gilded bubble could teach lessons he had long ignored, and that this tiny girl, holding so little, might just be about to do the unthinkable. The little girl shifted nervously on her feet, her coins jingling softly in her hand. She had been saving them for weeks, enough, she hoped, to buy a small loaf of bread and a carton of milk for her younger brother at home. She noticed the man in the sharp suit fumbling at the counter, his gold card rejected twice, and she tilted her head curiously. He didn't look angry, just embarrassed, flustered, human. Most adults might have turned away or pretended not to notice, but something about the moment stirred a boldness in her. She stepped closer to the counter, clutching her coins even tighter. Her small voice, barely above a whisper, caught Harrison's attention. "Sir, do you need help?" Harrison blinked, taken aback. The last person he expected to notice, or offer assistance, was a child with worn shoes and a patched jacket. He looked at her, expecting a timid plea for spare change, a hesitant, "Can I help you, sir?" with a shy smile. But her eyes held something else. A clarity, a fearlessness, a selfless concern that made him pause. "I'm trying to pay," Harrison muttered, feeling the heat rise in his cheeks. He forced a smile, hoping to brush off his embarrassment. The girl leaned a little closer, counting her coins one more time before slowly setting them on the counter. "I can help," she said simply. I have some money. You can use it. You need your coffee and pastry." The cafe fell silent for a heartbeat. Other customers glanced at the small, earnest figure, stunned by her generosity. Harrison stared at the coins, then at the little girl, unsure whether to laugh, cry, or thank her. Here was a child, with barely enough for herself, offering what little she had to someone she didn't know. Why would you do that?" he asked softly, his voice almost breaking. The girl shrugged, tilting her head as if the answer were obvious. "Because, sometimes people need help," she said simply. "Even big people." Harrison's chest tightened. He had spent a lifetime surrounded by wealth, influence, and power, yet this tiny stranger was teaching him something far more valuable than any bank account could buy. Humility. Compassion. The courage to accept kindness, even when pride screamed otherwise. For the first time in years, Harrison realized that true generosity wasn't measured in millions, it was measured in moments, in willingness to give, even when one had almost nothing to give. And in this quiet cafe, on a busy Saturday morning, a poor little girl was about to change the way a billionaire saw the world, and himself. Harrison knelt slightly to meet the little girl's gaze, feeling a lump form in his throat. He had faced boardroom battles, negotiated billion-dollar deals, and navigated high society events, but nothing in his life had prepared him for this quiet, unexpected moment of humility. The child before him, no older than 8, was offering a slice of her modest world to someone who had everything, and had just faced the embarrassment of being powerless over a simple transaction. He looked down at the coins she had placed gently on the counter. They barely covered the cost of the coffee and pastry, yet in that small gesture lay a lesson that dwarfed all his previous experiences. Generosity wasn't about money, status, or influence, it was about heart. The little girl's eyes were steady, unflinching, and full of compassion, as if she understood something that so many adults had forgotten. "Are you sure?" he whispered, his voice tight with emotion. "This is yours." She nodded earnestly. "Yes. But that's okay. I can manage," she replied softly. "I want you to have it." Harrison's hands trembled slightly as he picked up the coins. For a billionaire accustomed to commanding the room, this was disarming. Here, he was powerless, but in a way that didn't humiliate him, but opened his eyes. The world wasn't always about who had the most, sometimes it was about who cared enough to give the little they had. Other customers had started to notice, and a few had stopped mid-conversation, touched by the innocence and bravery of the gesture. A man in a nearby corner whispered to his wife, "Look at that. That little girl, she's amazing." Harrison's pride began to dissolve, replaced by a profound gratitude. He realized that the true wealth in life wasn't the money he amassed, the luxury cars, or the sprawling estates, it was the ability to recognize and cherish human kindness wherever it appeared, even from the smallest hands. The girl's eyes held him in a silent challenge. Would he accept the gift and the lesson, or would he let pride dictate his next move? Harrison inhaled deeply, feeling tears prick the corners of his eyes. Slowly, he smiled, genuinely and warmly, the first true smile that morning. "Thank you," he said, voice choked but sincere. I accept your kindness." The girl's face lit up with a small, triumphant smile, unaware of the profound impact she had just made. Harrison's heart swelled, not with pride, but with humility. For the first time in years, he felt the world tilt in a different way, one where compassion and courage outweighed wealth and power. In that cafe, on an ordinary Saturday morning, a billionaire had been humbled by a poor little girl, and his life, in ways he hadn't anticipated, would never be the same. The little girl's small gesture did more than just resolve Harrison's embarrassing predicament, it rippled through the cafe like a quiet, unstoppable wave. Customers who had been scrolling on phones, sipping coffee, or chatting absent-mindedly suddenly became witnesses to something extraordinary. Conversations hushed as people realized what had happened. A child, with almost nothing, had demonstrated the kind of generosity most adults spend a lifetime chasing. Harrison, still holding the coins, felt a new energy settle in the room. He glanced around and noticed how the barista, who had initially been apologetic about the card issue, now watched the girl with admiration. A young couple in the corner exchanged a look of disbelief, whispering to each other, "That's incredible. She just gave away her own money." The girl's quiet courage ignited a spark. A few customers stepped forward, subtly sliding a few bills onto the counter, insisting the barista keep the coffee on them. A man with a briefcase smiled warmly at the girl. "You've reminded all of us what matters most," he said softly, and she grinned shyly. Harrison felt a lump in his throat. In boardrooms, he had always measured success in numbers, in influence, in power, but here, in a small cafe, he realized that the most profound impact could be measured in hearts touched, not bank accounts. The little girl had taught him, in her innocent and unassuming way, that courage and kindness could outshine wealth every single time. He knelt slightly to meet her eyes again. "You've done more than just help me pay for coffee," he said gently. "You've reminded me what it means to truly care for someone else." Her cheeks flushed, but there was a quiet pride in her expression. "I just wanted to help," she whispered. "Even a little bit can matter." A murmur of agreement spread among the other patrons. Some nodded to each other, realizing that this simple act of generosity had shifted the atmosphere. Strangers smiled at one another, a newfound sense of warmth filling the air. A woman sipping tea whispered, "We should all try to be more like her." Harrison felt tears prick his eyes. He had come in expecting nothing but an ordinary morning, and yet he was leaving with something far greater, a lesson in humility, compassion, and the power of even the smallest act of generosity. He knew, in that moment, that this day, the embarrassment, the humility, the kindness, would stay with him forever. And as he looked at the little girl, standing proud despite her modest means, he realized that she had not only changed his morning, but she had changed him. The cafe had grown unusually quiet. Patrons had returned to their drinks and laptops, but an undercurrent of awe lingered in the air. Harrison, still holding his wallet, knelt beside the little girl, who was now beaming shyly. He felt an unfamiliar warmth, a stirring he hadn't experienced amid boardrooms and luxury cars. Here was a child whose generosity outshone his wealth, whose courage made his own social power feel meaningless. "Thank you," Harrison said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "You've given me a lesson I'll never forget." He watched her fidget with her sleeve, her small hands clasped in a way that betrayed both humility and pride. "Most adults wouldn't have had the courage to do what you just did." The little girl shrugged, a shy grin breaking across her face. "I just wanted to help. That's all." Her simplicity, her unassuming heart, struck him profoundly. Here was someone who understood the true power of kindness, without expecting anything in return. Harrison looked around the cafe. Strangers offered nods, smiles, and murmurs of approval. The barista, who had been hesitant moments earlier, leaned forward, her eyes glistening. "You've reminded all of us why we do what we do," she said. "Sometimes it's the smallest gestures that mean the most." Something inside Harrison shifted. For the first time in years, he felt stripped of the trappings of wealth, ego, and social status. He realized that what truly mattered in life wasn't money, influence, or luxury, it was the ability to care, to show compassion, to lift someone else up when they needed it most. He reached into his wallet again, this time pulling out a small stack of bills. "Let me match what you gave," he said gently, placing them in the girl's hand. Her eyes widened, but she shook her head. "No, I couldn't." "You already helped me in the most important way," he interrupted softly, smiling. "But now we can help someone else together. That's the point." The little girl's grin widened, and Harrison realized that in teaching him humility, she had also taught him joy. The two of them stepped aside, letting the barista prepare extra drinks for those who had contributed. It was no longer about embarrassment or money, it was about connection, compassion, and shared humanity. As Harrison left the cafe later, he carried more than coffee. He carried a renewed heart, inspired by a little girl whose courage had outshone his wealth. He knew he would never forget this day, the day a child reminded a billionaire that true richness lies not in currency, but in kindness.